How the soul departs after death, the phenomenon of astral phantoms. There have been people in my life who have already passed on to another world. I had certain relationships with them, and sometimes memories of them come back, seemingly impossible to let go of. No matter what kind of cleansing of the astral body I perform, it only helps temporarily. After a few months, everything returns to its original state. I think this happens because these deceased people are still being held here by the living, including those I am in contact with, some of our mutual acquaintances. Should I remove the presence of the deceased from my life? Or could I contact them at the right time when needed and ask for help? I see. Well, your question is complex, and a simple yes or no answer would not do it justice. Let's explore the concept of people who have passed away, but who still seem to be present in this world, and the role they play in our lives. First of all, it's important to note that in most cases, the system works in such a way that the souls of the deceased, their informational structures, do not remain in our world. The departure of a soul from this world follows a specific algorithm. This process involves the gradual wrapping up of all subtle bodies. It begins with the death of the physical body, when biological processes cease, and connections to the earth are severed. Once these connections to the earth are severed, the nourishment drawn from the earth stops. Without this force, human consciousness cannot continue to exist. As a result, the remaining subtle bodies begin to wrap up one by one. The etheric body is wrapped up during the first 3 days after death. During this period, the etheric double remains present in the etheric realm. This underpins many Russian traditions, such as burying the deceased on the 3rd day, but not earlier. Typically, burials are held on the 3rd day because that is when the etheric body naturally dissolves. If burial takes place earlier, the etheric body may remain attached to the grave or burial site for some time, as what belongs to the earth stays with the earth. If this connection is not severed, the etheric body becomes attached to a particular place, which is always undesirable for the deceased. However, if the process unfolds as it should, and the etheric body is released on the 3rd day, the astral body is wrapped up on the 9th day. Until the 9th day, the consciousness remains at the level of the astral body, that is, at the level of emotions. During this period, it is customary to hold a memorial gathering where people share kind words about the deceased. There is even a saying, "Of the dead, say nothing but good." The purpose of this farewell is to ensure that no grudges are held against the deceased and to emphasize that he or she was a good person. At this moment of farewell, certain connections between the living and the deceased are severed. These ceremonies also encode information into the astral entity representing the deceased at that time, information that will later be needed by their soul to pass through purgatory. After the 9th day, and up to the 40th day after death, the deceased become free of attachment to the physical world. They are still partially present in the astral realm, but are no longer bound and have already been liberated. They can move freely through space and between realms, as they are now able to do so. However, most of the deceased seldom use this ability, as they were deeply attached to their loved ones in life and do not want to part with them. this case, there is an algorithm in the system to forcibly separate the deceased from their loved ones. This happens on the 40th day, when the final farewell takes place, and the astral entity wraps up and transitions to the level of the mental body. As we know, the mental realm contains primarily information rather than energy. There is less energy there, which is why the deceased cannot energetically attach themselves to the living after the 40th day. They simply lack the energy to do so. They remain only on the informational plane, at the level of the mental body, where they stay as long as they are remembered and kept alive in the memories of the living. However, all of this concerns the personality, not the soul. Once the soul is released from the astral realm, it becomes completely free. After the 40th day, it departs from the earthly plane. If it is not bound to this world by specific seals, connections, or debts, but instead exists as a structure free of obligations, it passes through purgatory. Here, it is liberated from unnecessary attachments that might otherwise keep it close to its loved ones. And it is here that the so-called weighing takes place, which determines the existential volume of the soul and its subsequent reincarnation. This final phase can take a considerable amount of time, or it can be instantaneous. It all depends on the functionality of the system. Thus, a person who has died, but is still remembered by people, generally exists only in the mental realm. The living themselves sustain his presence in the astral realm. Through their memories, emotions, attachments, tears, and remembrances of the deceased, they weigh down and energetically charge his mental entity, thereby creating a phantom that continues to exist in the astral realm. Essentially, it is people who create these phantoms. The only exceptions to this are those deceased individuals who, during their lifetimes, developed, shall we say, non-human connections in this world. These include mages, sorcerers, or those who lived outside the boundaries of normal human life, often fulfilling specific missions. For such people, the stages of departing from this world are slightly different. But returning to your question, when someone dies young and undoubtedly had numerous connections, family members, close friends, and others who loved them, they leave behind cherished memories in this world. Typically, when older people die, it is easier for others to move on from their memories. They pass on, and life goes on. But when young people die, it is different. Young people make a lot of connections, and those left behind, often young themselves, struggle to see death as a cleansing process. For them, death is either an unbearable tragedy or a game to be resisted. As a result, such individuals are unwilling to cut ties and cannot let go of the deceased. However, I must emphasize again that this is not about the soul. That is beyond human control and beyond our domain. What they cannot let go of is the personality of the person they knew. They feed it with energy, the energy of their desire for that personality to stay with them. This creates a phantom in the astral realm, one that possesses astral intelligence and exists only because your memory of the deceased persists. Consequently, this phantom becomes a representation of your mind in the astral realm. Have I made myself clear, or do you want me to explain it again? This phantom is a representation of your mind, a representation of your memory in the astral realm, a representation that you have created there. The astral realm is a place where entirely different worlds intersect, worlds that are completely distinct from one another. Your phantoms, or more accurately, our phantoms, also exist there, and we create them in large numbers. Since this is a shared space, a kind of Elysium, where all are allowed to exist, Such a phantom has the ability to communicate independently and learn from other entities present there. As a result, it absorbs all sorts of information that was not originally part of it. It receives information from other similar phantoms, from other worlds, from artificially created astral entities, from larvae, vampires. It doesn't matter. They all coexist there. It must be said that there are worlds where numerous forms of life exist, not only on the physical plane, but also in the astral realm. You yourself have likely visited these realms many times during astral projection in your dreams. Those who experience lucid dreaming and practice dreamwalking often find themselves in these worlds, which intersect with our own at certain points of existence. From these points, you can travel anywhere, provided, of course, that you have permission and no strong attachments to our world. Even in our own world, there are programs, functions, and guardians that simply prevent you from crossing certain boundaries. This is ultimately for the best, as in many other worlds, human consciousness is considered a virus, much like certain entities from other worlds are seen as viruses to us. They operate at frequencies where human consciousness cannot survive, and direct interaction with such entities could easily result in physical death, either during sleep or shortly thereafter. This is a function of the system that protects both itself and us from such unauthorized intrusions. However, this does not apply to phantoms, as they are not bound by a physical body. Consequently, they are free to absorb all sorts of information in the astral realm. At all times, attitudes towards such phantoms have been mixed. On the one hand, these phantoms can act as guardian geniuses, appearing in dreams to warn people of potential problems. How do they manage this? Because in the astral realm, everything that is destined to manifest in our world has either already happened or has the potential to happen. In other words, information is revealed there in a slightly different way. And these phantoms can use the channels that exist between the living and the deceased, channels that remain active because the living maintain them, to pass on information. So when the deceased appear in your dreams, or send you some sort of sign, it happens through these channels that you have established. As long as you remember the deceased, as long as they remain in your consciousness, even as a faint memory, this can serve as the basis for such a channel. But sometimes these phantoms absorb such information, enter such worlds, and make contact with such entities that are harmful to humans. When this happens, they transform into what is commonly known as a ghoul. A ghoul is a deceased person whose consciousness has been trapped in the astral realm. It cannot move on and instead parasitizes the living. If the living do not willingly feed it with their emotions and memories, it will begin to attach itself to the nearest beings it can reach. Do I make myself clear? And the whole battle against such entities, which was particularly prevalent in the Middle Ages, was directed specifically against these ghouls. They were believed to be demonic beings. In part, this is true. They are demonic beings because they have absorbed information that makes them more demonic than human. But again, this has nothing to do with the soul. The soul is an informational structure that, after death, returns to its source, to its creator. It exchanges information with the creator and is then reincarnated here again. A phantom, on the other hand, is an imprint of consciousness that has no soul but possesses spirit, meaning the force of survival. Your connection with the deceased occurs solely at your initiative. If you choose not to remember them and set that as your goal, making the necessary effort, such as through specific ritual practices designed to sever these ties, then the connection will be broken. If it troubles you, it is essential to break that connection. However, if it does not trouble you, and the deceased person, or rather, their consciousness from the astral realm, serves as a guide and helper throughout your life, then, in my opinion, it would be sheer folly to rid yourself of such a helper. Such entities are usually removed from the astral realm through already established religious channels. In many cases, these religious channels are specifically designed for this purpose. For example, Christian memorial services for the repose of the soul, along with all that accompanies them, are conducted precisely to establish a channel through which the soul can be removed from the astral realm. This is done through a very powerful channel, and no entity can resist it. For instance, if you arrange a 40-day memorial service for the deceased and the service is genuinely performed, not merely the money taken without the service being fulfilled, as unfortunately sometimes happens, then the memorial service, when carried out correctly, creates a very powerful channel. This channel finds the astral entity and draws it in. Moreover, if it is merely an astral entity without a human soul, it will simply dissolve as it approaches purgatory. It has no soul, and therefore breaks down into atoms. However, it could happen that such an entity has a human soul. It could be that there was a system failure, and the consciousness couldn't rise to the mental level and got stuck. This can happen because the soul has too many debts or emotional attachments to the surrounding world. It cannot leave the earthly plane and is forced to remain here. Cases like this are very similar to the story depicted in the American film Ghost, if I remember correctly, with Patrick Swayze. For example, the desire for anger or revenge can be so overwhelming that neither the soul nor the personality can depart. In such a case, during the passage through purgatory, the consciousness is cleansed. Or, to be more precisely, the soul is cleansed of the consciousness. The informational structure of the soul goes where it belongs, while all these fragments of the personality simply dissolve. This is why, in the Christian tradition, it is believed that if the deceased begins to haunt you, appear at night, or preoccupy your thoughts, you should go to church and arrange a 40-day memorial service. A competent priest will then perform the appropriate rituals. What does perform the appropriate rituals mean? It means establishing this channel and reciting specific words to summon the deceased into the channel. Essentially, the priest will attract the soul, and the rest will be resolved through the process of purgatory. This is what usually happens, but as you can understand, any system can experience failures. Sometimes a person doesn't leave the earthly plane, and everything unfolds differently from how it should. For example, a person might have a lot of sins that keep them in this world, in this space, or they might have a huge number of seals that prevent them from entering purgatory. Folk wisdom even jokes that someone with that many sins wouldn't even be welcome in hell, because there isn't a hell that can handle them. Anything can happen. In such cases, special rituals must be performed. These rituals involve activating a search program to find such a person, pulling them into the channel, and then everything proceeds according to the scenario I've described to you. If you are not a Christian and therefore do not wish to be associated with this system, then runes can be of great help to you. Hell's seal breaks all connections completely and permanently. But again, only if you really need it. As I've said, such contact is not always harmful to you. Sometimes the deceased can truly be our guardian geniuses. Usually these guardian geniuses are guided by a sincere and deep feeling of pure attachment to the living. You have shared equally strong feelings for one another. In such a case, this astral phantom will not leave your field, but will remain close to you, always protecting your interests. That's how it works.